Many times when you're using a piece of software, it has a graphical user interface with certain expected behaviors, like button clicks, text boxes, labels, default closing operations like minimizing, maximizing, and so forth. But how do we do that with Java? Well, today in this video, I'm going to show you how. Hi, my name is Michael Rogers. I'm a Java dev with over 19 years of experience in software development. If you like web development and programming videos, then please like and subscribe to this one so you can receive all of the updates of my latest videos. Today we're going to create a simple Java GUI application that contains a text box, a label, and a button. When you type in the text box and click the button, it'll update the label. This demo should give you the most basic of introductions to Java GUI development with Swing. Without further ado, let's get started. I'm using IntelliJ CE 2024.1. Let's click on the New Project button. And then with Java selected, go ahead and type display name app GUI. You'll notice here that I have Corretto 21 selected. For this project, any version from JDK 8 to the present should be fine for what we're doing today. Hopefully you're using a newer JDK than version 8 at this point. Let's click Create. So what is a GUI? A GUI is short for Graphical User Interface. Don't get too caught up in the pronunciation though. However, it's important to say this correctly, otherwise people are going to look at you kind of weird. Now, a GUI, or a Graphical User Interface, is what you might expect. Most modern computing applications have what is called a WYSIWYG. It is a what you see, what you get. It is a GUI. It allows you to click on certain things, type in text, and perform certain input, output, and processing operations. Let's create our first one real quick here with Java. Okay, let's first go ahead and delete any main class if it was created. If not, you should see something what I have here. Right-click on it. We're going to create a package, and we'll call this com.cwm.gui. Now, you could call your package anything you want. Typically, you would call it com your name and then dot something that represents the type of application. So I have GUI here representing that this is going to hold a graphical user interface. Hit return or enter on your keyboard, then right click again. We're going to create a Java class, and we're going to call this the same as our project. So just say display name app GUI, hit return, go to the new line. Now, first of all, we're going to add several Swing components to our project. We're going to add a JFrame, a JLabel, a JTextBox, and a JButton, as well as something called a panel, which exists in the alt package library. So let's go ahead and start creating our JFrame. The JFrame is essentially a windowing component that represents the type of windowing component your operating system uses. Please make sure you include the import here. So I'm including a JFrame, and I'm calling this frame. And this frame is basically going to display the default closing, minimizing, and maximizing operations, as well as title and things like that. Next, let's go ahead and create a JPanel. And the JPanel is going to be used for controlling the elements that are added to the frame. So we add all the elements to the JPanel first. So we'll call this our panel as well. Then we're going to create a JText field. We'll just call it text field. We'll create a private JLabel, and we're just going to call this a label. And finally, we're going to create a private JButton, and we'll call this button. So we have the basic components set upon our page, but I also want to create a couple other variables here. One is a temp variable for holding text, because I want to grab the text and assign it to the variable, but I also want to check this variable to see the status of what is in it. Now, you'll understand why I'm doing this as we go forward, but let's just create a simple string variable called text to display, and we're going to set this variable to null. Later on, we'll assign to it and we'll check its value. Next, we'll create a private static final variable called default text, and I'm just going to say this is nothing entered yet. When the label is displayed on the page, I want this to be the default value that is displayed in the label. This should be string. There we go. Now, we have these variables created, but let's go ahead and also create at this point a default constructor. So this is display name app GUI. We're going to make this public. It accepts no variables. It's going to be our default constructor, but we're going to use this to initialize things like our frame. So we'll say frame equals new JFrame. Panel equals new JPanel. We're going to have our label equal new JLabel, and we're going to have our text field equal new JText field, and finally we're going to have our button equal new JButton. Now I want my button to have a label, and the constructor for the JButton allows that, so we'll just put in a label here of update label, meaning that the button itself will have a text upon it. This is update label, and later on we're going to have an action that will update the label, this label here. Okay, now I have these elements in place, but I want to do a couple other things real quick. First of all, I want to create a little bit of logic to test the status of the text field, the text to display. So we're going to say text to display. If it equals null, we're going to say text to display is going to equal the default text, and then we're going to assign our label set text to display, and then we're also going to set our label set foreground with a color of light gray. We want this to be have a very minimalistic look to it on the GUI. Now let's add an else. Otherwise, the label is going to be set to foreground, and we'll set the color to it to black. All right, so we have the basics of our application set up, but we don't have any public static void method yet, and we also haven't added to our panel all of these new components. So let's go ahead and first of all type in panel, and we're going to set the layout, and for this we're going to use a new grid layout, and this is going to be basically 0 rows, 1 column, because we want the items to go right down a single column instead of having 2 columns and multiple rows and so forth. Okay, so we'll do that, and then we're going to say panel. We're going to add the first element, which is going to be our label. We want that to be at the top. Then we're going to add our text field. That is the next one we want to be displayed. Finally, we're going to add our button. Now we've added these items to the panel, and the panel now needs to be added to the JFrame, but we also need to do a few other things for the JFrame. Like we need to set the default closing operations, and this takes an int value. Luckily, the int value for this can be accessed through the JFrame class itself using a public static variable. Exit on close. What that'll do is when we click the X on the graphical user icon, it will also shut down the program. All right, so we've done that. Let's type frame again, use the add method, and now we want to add our panel to the frame, and we need to set a border layout to the frame just as we did to the panel. Now the border layout here is going to be centered. We want it to be very basic because the panel is handling all of the layout components for itself, so the panel needs to be centered in the J-frame, and that's what we're doing with this border layout. All application windows in your that you would use on your operating system have a title, so we're going to set the title, and we'll call this our first GUI. Then we need to use this command to pack, and finally we need to set the application to be visible. Now you would think this would be by default, but with Java Swing you have to specify it to be true for it to be visible. Now we haven't done a couple of things yet, like we haven't set the action, but we're going to get to that in a minute for the button. Let's go ahead and create a public static void main method, because you have to have that. We're going to call upon the display name app GUI, and so far everything is set. Let's go ahead and run the application and just see what happens. Okay, as you can see here, we have a simple panel. Things are lined up in the panel, and we have nothing to see. We have a text field that we can type some stuff, and we have a button that does nothing. But we also have the minimize, we have maximize, and we have the close operation. And as you can see here, it closes the application. How do we add an action? Well, on our button, when we initialized it, we can set up an action listener for it. And what this action listener does is it specifies what it's going to listen for. Okay, I want this class to implement an action listener. And this is very basic, so we'll just say implements action listener. And this interface requires one method called action perform. So we're going to head and add that to our method. And if we go back to line 24 here, you see that I've set the action listener, but I haven't told it what to listen for or what action listener to add to it. And I'm going to say this because this is the class that I'm adding to it. So this class has an action listener, and when the button is clicked, it's automatically going to invoke this method. All right, so this is where the real logic is at for how we set the label. So let's go text to display, and we're going to set that to equal text field get text, which means whatever we typed into the text field, the .getText method will grab that information and left assign it to this private member variable text to display. Now, what if someone clicks the button and they haven't typed anything? Well, we don't want it to throw an error, so we want to check for that. And we can do that just by saying if text to display is null, this will satisfy that null pointer situation that by the way, I did that purposely because I want to check for nullability, and I also want to check for whether it's empty. So if I say text to display is null, we know that's true, or text to display is empty. And what empty does, empty checks to see if it has one space. So we're checking for nullability or if it's empty. And if it is empty or null, then we want to use our default text that's assigned up top. If this condition is not the condition we're looking for, then we want to say label set text text to display. Very basic. Okay. First of all, our panel, it actually needs a border layout. We have a grid layout, but we don't have a border layout. Let's go ahead and add to our panel here a border layout. So I'm going to say set border, and I'm going to use the border factory to create a empty border. Now you could use a beveled border, a compound border, a dash border, any of those, and you can imagine what a beveled border is. It gives a bit of a it's a line that makes it look like it goes up a little bit three-dimensionally. Or a compound border is like two lines, or a dash border is a dashed line. We're just going to set an empty border, and this is going to take certain parameters of spacing. So for example, the first one is going to be I think it's the left and top and bottom and right. I think it's the way it's set. Yeah, no, it's top, left, bottom, and right. So we're saying at the top it's going to have 30 pixels, at the left is going to be 30 pixels, at the bottom only give 10 pixels of padding, and at the right 30 pixels of padding. Okay, so we've done all this. Let's go ahead and taste. Let's taste the application again. Not taste, but let's test. Here we go. We'll run it again. And you can see that we have the padding that we defined in there. We'll click Update. Nothing happens. Update. Actually, empty test removes it. That's interesting. Update. Nothing happens. Let's type in our name. And there we go. We have our name present. So hopefully this gives you a basic introduction to creating your first app with Java Swing. There's a lot more that we can go into this, and you're going to learn more in the upcoming lessons about grid layouts and border layouts and so forth. All right. Catch you next time.